Well, yeah. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're talking about running. We're talking about running in sleeves versus no sleeves. John presses record. I love it.
For me, we're actually 2 hours early. So
yeah, and for me, we're 1 hour late. So we're perfect. We're perfect.
Can you hear me okay? Because I just got a message. My microphone
Yeah,
switched.
it's funny. As soon as you start recording, it.
Okay, let me make sure my microphone is microphone. It says it's okay. Realtek audio. I don't know.
I can hear you, but it seems like your mic switched.
Okay.
That,
It was like once I hit record.
oh, there you go. It's good.
Oh, so maybe it's my let me just try to unplug it and plug it back in. Let's do the magic. Okay. And it looks like it's trying to. Okay, how's this now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but something got loose and now it's.
And now another technical difficulty on a Friday night.
Friday night for you. It's Friday afternoon for me. I
Yep.
hope the waves crashing is not interfering with the audio.
If it does, we'll all learn to deal with it and to live with it.
All right, and who just commented? Belinda, thank you, Belinda. Belinda says she can hear me, so that's good. All right, so audio's working. The waves aren't interfering too much. I am on the patio in Hawaii, Kona, and it is just nice here. So
awesome. Well, we're going to talk more running tonight. So last week we started talking about myths and truths in running from the Runner's World magazine, and they posted, I think it was 13 things, and I think we made it through 6 or 7 of them last time. So we're just going to jump back into that because it was super fun talking about these. I love these. I love these articles that I think a lot of these things, they come up and they're really common myths. And it's not just this article. We've talked about with other articles before. So the first one we're going to talk about is called 2 Lies and a Truth About Shoes. So the first lie is replace your shoes every 300 miles. So John, obviously this is your world of research. Yeah. So when you read that one, what did you think?
Oh, it's a number I'll often throw out, 300 to 500 miles. And it comes from tests that we actually do in our lab, and other running companies and other biomechanics labs do the test as well, is that we've got a special machine that we put the shoes in, and that machine will measure how much impact energy the shoe absorbs. Now we only, for the most part, just test the rear portion of the shoe. That's the standard for the test. That's the way that we do it. Every now and then we may do the forefoot, but in order to do the forefoot, we actually have to destroy the shoes and cut away the upper to be able to test it. Because basically what happens is an instrument that looks sort of like this, it drops down on the shoe, and then we're able to measure the impact energy and then how much energy is absorbed ultimately by the shoe, the rear portion of the shoe. And so what we'll do is we'll impact test brand new shoes, and then we'll put them in another machine that does repetitive loading. And that machine does exactly as it sounds. It just drops a weight on the shoes in a specific location on the shoe, the rear portion of the shoe, the rear foot portion. And we'll set the machine to, pound out 100 miles or 200 miles or 300 miles or whatever interval. We'll pull the shoes out and we'll test how much impact energy those shoes absorb again. And then what we do is we ultimately plot out the amount of impact energy that the shoes are absorbing across different accumulated mileage. And you start to see, a pretty good break point, somewhere around 300, 400, 500 miles, depending on the shoe, depending on the material of the shoe. There's lots of things that even go into just mechanical testing the shoe. And that's where those recommendations come from, purely mechanical testing. Now, there are companies that also do wear testing of shoes. And what they do is they have a group of runners that they send their shoes out, and they also just keep track of the mileage and the shoes. And for the most part, those types of data line up fairly well, the actual wear testing data and the impact testing. And so it's a common number to throw out, but there's no threshold and your shoes will be constantly changing, and there's no magic number that you need to change the shoes out.
So a few years ago, I guess it's probably like 5 or 6 years ago now, there was a student that we worked with that had us run in, they were Nike free something.
Mhm.
And they were like more like a minimalist. They were not a true minimalist shoe, but they didn't have much of a cushion.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to track our miles that we ran, and I think I got to 130 miles, and the shoe felt like a rock.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he also reported back to me, because he, later, that basically I ran the furthest out of anyone in the shoes, because people were just like, they can't keep running in the shoe because they felt it was so, the foam had basically just, become so hard.
Yeah.
And so, that shoe didn't hold to this 300 myth. And now if we look at the maximalist shoes, right? The 30, was it 31 millimeter? I think they're allowed of foam now, or 32 millimeters of foam in like the Meta Sky Speed and the Nike, whatever, the fast Nike shoe. Vaporflies, and the Adidas, whatever they are. Now we're talking about like 5 or 6 times the thickness of that shoe that was tested. And I can tell you this purely anecdotally, because I've run a lot of miles in those shoes, especially the Nikes. I'll actually feel it different in the right versus the left.
Oh yeah, right.
Right. And I also can measure, like, if I'm more right or left foot dominant, I'm very neutral. I'm like 49-51. I'm very neutral. But I can tell you, like, this shoe feels like it's breaking down faster than this shoe, right versus left. And I'm like, I'm doing apparently the same thing. It's not like I'm running a track and running around in a circle. I'm out on the road or I'm on my treadmill. And so I think even an individual shoe, like just one shoe, could be different. Is that what you found in some of the testing as well?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing. So one anecdotes also in terms of the super shoes. I am hearing a lot of anecdotes that people are seeing, damage to the shoes after a marathon, after 2 marathons. And so I think you're right. I think there's some shoes that degrade so much faster than others. And so again, there's no magic number for any of these shoes. But what's interesting that you talk about this left versus right part, I'll tell you that the shoes are not made to be together.
Right.
That means the right shoes, they're built in the factory X. The left shoes are built on a different set of machines. So they're not even, it's not like the 2 shoes are being made to be together.
They're not friends. They're not friends until someone puts you in a box.
At the end of the day, there's just a right foot shoe bin and a left shoe bin, and they go together. And so what often is funny is if you try the shoes on in a store and one shoe doesn't seem to just fit right, just ask for another box of shoes and then try that shoe out. So if your left shoe doesn't feel right in one box, just say, hey, can I have 11 go get another pair of 11, the same brand, and then try that left on and see if it feels any different. So the right and the left shoes have nothing to do with each other. And so I'm not surprised to hear that. Now, another study we did, which was interesting, and we actually need to go back and do this again, is we did this repetitive loading experiment with a pair of shoes. And when we do that type of test, we only repetitively load one shoe. We just take the right or the left. We don't do both of them. And so we ended up with a set of pair of shoes where one shoe was repetitively loaded and the other shoe was not. And so we then did a quick experiment on whether or not the run biomechanics would be different for the left or the right, knowing that one set of shoes had accumulated mileage and the others didn't. And we didn't really do a really great job with that experiment. But what was interesting is there were very few differences in the run biomechanics, despite the accumulated mileage on one shoe versus the other. And the person who wore them, the subject who wore them, they were blinded to whether or not one shoe, we never even told them. We just said, hey, here's a pair of shoes, we want you to run in them. And then we told them afterwards that one shoe has been repetitively loaded. So,
But could they tell?
No, they couldn't. No.
Yeah. So that'd be another, it'd be interesting to do where you had someone run, let's say 300 miles in a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
Then you blinded them somehow. I don't know how you necessarily do it. And then just switch out one shoe.
Yeah. Right.
Give them a new shoe, the exact same brand, everything, and have them go run and say, can you feel a difference?
Yeah.
Right. And not even looking, I mean, the biomechanics side is obviously really interesting, but runners, a lot of runners, they can feel things that we don't necessarily measure biomechanically.
Well, no, and I love that. And I like the study that you talked about, because that was trying to replicate what we do in the lab with real world. And real world running and real world wear and tear on shoes is quite different than what we do in the lab.
Yeah.
The lab is a very controlled impact of the rear foot portion of the shoe. It's a missile that looks like this and just keeps pounding on the shoe in one spot. So you can even see the indentation in the shoe after a while. Whereas when you run outside, you get the outer sole wear, and you may even get some uneven wear in that outer sole. And I think that's the part that, as a runner, you may actually be sensing is the uneven wear of a shoe.
Yeah, it's super interesting stuff. So our take home for this one is 300 miles means absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
it's just a number. And in my experience as a runner, I can tell, like, when it starts to, when it doesn't feel as cushiony as it did before,
right,
then change shoes. And that's always been my kind of way I've handled it.
I think that is great advice. And then I would add in inspecting the outer sole of the shoe. And I wish I had my pair of running shoes here. Actually, but the shoes I have probably don't have much wear on them. But what you can do is inspect. I got shoes on right now. Oh yeah, if you got a pair, if you inspect the bottom of the shoe, that's what you're looking for in terms of wear and tear. Because what I always tell people is, when you start seeing that wear and tear, you're starting to run differently on a pair of shoes. And so, so if you show the rear portion of the outer sole, point the outer sole up, point the toe down, and now show the outer sole. Okay, so I can see the wear in the lighter color of the sole.
Yeah.
And I bet you that wear pattern on that side is different than the wear pattern on your other side.
All right, I'm gonna grab the other one. These probably have 150 miles.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess.
So what happens is that outer sole starts to get worn down, and it may even wear down some of the midsole. And so then you've got this shoe that is quite different than a brand new shoe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you can see the wear pattern in the discoloration of the sole is different.
Oh, let me bring it up here.
Yeah, definitely right there in the rear foot.
Yep.
It's pretty even for both of them. That's interesting. But the right and the left do look different in terms of, I'm just looking at the coloration of the sole.
Yep.
Sometimes what you can also do is you can put the shoes down on a table. Yep. And then just start pressing on the upper, and you start to see how much rocking there is. Yep. And if you start to see more rocking on one shoe versus the other, that's a good indication that the wear is more on one. And the reason why I say to watch for that is because your body will adapt to that. And your body will be fine for the most part, even with a bit of wear on the outer sole. But once you switch back to a brand new pair, and now if you push on the very top of the
like pushing here?
Actually more on the part that goes up against your Achilles.
Oh, push.
Yeah, just a little bit. And what you can do is you can start to see if it rocks side to side. Is what you're looking for. And that rocking side to side is an indication that there's wear and tear on the outer.
So this is a really interesting shoe. So when I first started running in this shoe, you can actually see how the lateral side is higher than the medial side.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I ran like 50 miles in it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I must be really striking hard on that outside or on the inside. But this is just how the shoe is made.
Yeah.
Right. It has more cushion on the medial or on the medial side because that's the normal landing.
Interesting. Yeah.
I guess. And I really like running in these shoes but they just weren't as fast as the Nike. So
Yeah, right.
but yeah, once again, super interesting. I think one of the messages you're giving us, John, is actually inspect your shoes.
Oh, totally inspect the shoes, and that's the sign to change it out, because when your shoe gets so worn down and then you go buy a brand new pair of shoes, it's, even though it's the same model, it's now going to be two very different types of shoes. And so your body's adapted to the shoe that's been worn down, and now you put your brand new shoe in, and you've got to take time to get used to running in a brand new shoe, even though it's the same model. So I always say watch for the wear and tear.
The other one I'm gonna add on this one, and once again we're like 20 minutes in and we're on our first thing,
Yeah.
but that's okay. Is the heel counter is another one, right? And we're gonna talk about that in this, but I'm not always as concerned about the breakdown here in the foam as I am here, because this is a snug part that actually holds your subtalar joint in place, right? And gives you there is a supportive thing here, the heel cup.
Yep.
And oftentimes I've seen runners where this is basically fallen completely apart. The foam is still okay.
Yeah.
Right. And it's probably because they're removing their shoes without unlacing them, and or trying to put them on without unlacing them, and they've just kind of smashed their foot into that section.
Yeah.
But the heel counter is an important part of the shoe, and once again, that's another thing that I'll inspect is this falling apart, and am I losing that stability there?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's mostly just held in with mostly glue, maybe some stitching depending on the type of shoe manufacturer, but it's and that glue breaks down, and you're right, that can start to change the integrity of the shoe.
And you said another really interesting thing, and I think it's important we talk about this, because I don't think we've ever talked about this, is you said the breaking down of the shoe, right? And that you get used to the breaking down of the shoe. And I think it's really interesting, because I can tell you, this is more from when I used to work in soccer. Athletes would always say, "Oh, I got to break my shoes in," right?
Yeah.
And even runners say this. "Oh, I gotta put 50 miles on to break my shoes in, and I get blisters until I break them in." To me, that just means the shoe doesn't fit properly.
Yeah.
Do you agree on that?
Yeah, I think the way shoes are built now is that there isn't really a break-in period so much.
Right.
Although you do need to put the shoe on to figure out if there's any hot spots that are hitting you. And if there's a hot spot hitting you, which would be causing a blister, you're not wearing the right shoe.
Or the size is wrong.
Or the size is wrong. That's right.
Yeah, it could be the right model. Everything could be good.
The width, yeah.
Yeah, the width is wrong. In my experience dealing with a lot of people's injured feet because of shoes, you don't break in the shoe, your shoe breaks in your foot.
Yeah, I like that. That's right.
Right. You get a blister, and then it forms a callus, and then and you get your foot becomes a little stronger to put up with the shoe. And I agree, like shoe technology in as far as comfort has come so far in the last even 20 years that if that shoe doesn't feel good running within 5 miles, you're probably on the wrong shoe.
Well, and the origin of this myth is a lot of running shoes early on had some heavy fabric components, maybe some leather, maybe some suede, where maybe it did take some time to get that shoe to break in, but that's not the case now. The upper fabrics that are being used now are so flexible that it's really you shouldn't have any issue with a brand new pair of shoes unless it's not the right shoe. I know that sounds contradictory, but
okay. The next lie: your shoes will last longer if you rotate them.
Well, calendar days, yes, but in terms of the material, no.
Right.
Material breakdown is material breakdown, and there's different ideas that maybe it would take 24 hours for the material to get back to normal elastic behavior, because that's the whole energy absorption of the shoe is all built on elasticity of the foam of the midsole, and again the midsole material that the shoe companies are using now, it recovers pretty quickly. It's not
and this is said
24 hours.
It's at like 40 minutes.
Yeah,
I think it was some of the research that I've come up with, 30 or 40 minutes it's back. So unless you're going to be running again go for your 10 miler and then 20 minutes later go for another 10 miler,
Yeah,
which I don't think many people are doing. But this is an interesting myth, right? But it's also an interesting part because we've talked about rotating our shoes, but for a reason.
Yeah.
And so what's the reason why you and I rotate our shoes?
Well, I do rotate them to get the calendar length longer. So yeah, it may still accumulate the same number of mileage, but if I'm rotating, then I can extend out the life, the absolute day life of the shoe. But I also the shoes I rotate are different models and different. They're actually different sizes too. So,
yeah, but you do that for a purpose, right? What's the purpose?
Yeah. Because the idea is to introduce a little bit of what we call variability in training. Yep. And what happens is if you run, well, it's easy to know if you run on grass versus run on pavement, you run differently. If you run on sand, you run differently. If you run on trails, you run differently. If you run in snow, you run differently. If you run in rain, you run differently. And so you change that surface, then you automatically, your brain, you don't have to do anything. Your brain will just automatically change the date. And some of those subtle changes are probably good for a healthy runner. And so what we advocate is really trying to promote doing different things, running on different surfaces, or in this case, running in different shoes. Yeah. If you're running different shoes, shoe one versus shoe two, you'll run a little bit differently on each of those shoes. And the trick is not to have too big of a swing of changes, and to introduce these subtle changes.
I have a stable usually of 3 that I'm going through, like three different pairs of shoes. 2 same manufacturer, 1 different manufacturer, but the ones that are the same manufacturer, they're different. I mean,
yeah.
And I know for me, like if I go too long with the same pair of shoes, I start to get little niggles and little things, and I switch up the shoe, and I'm like, okay, good, I'm good again. And I just got to remember to do that. So for me, one of the things I do is I have 1 pair at work.
Yeah.
So when I go for a lunch run, and that's a different shoe completely, and it's only so then it doesn't even tempt me. Oh man, my last 2 runs in that shoe were great, which we tend to do. I'm going to keep rolling the dice and going with those shoes again. Or so if I want to go for a lunch run, I just have that shoe there, and that's going to be what it is. For me personally, that helps.
No, that's good. And again, a lot of people may have racing shoes. And they're training shoes, and that's an okay concept to do, but you still got to figure out how to run in those racing shoes. And so you do need to have some training in that type of shoe. Although, I often save my racing shoe for racing day, but I do often do some running in those shoes just to have that.
I run in my racing shoes. I'd like to run at least once a week in them. And even if I'm not doing faster running, I just like, I want my body to be like, this is what I don't want to be strange, especially during the season. Maybe in the off season where there's like several months between races, maybe I wouldn't do that. But the truth is I do it anyways.
And this is where someone will often ask, well, what about barefoot running? And I am a true advocate for being in bare feet. I'm not bare feet. You're just being bare feet as much as you can, but running shoes, especially in Las Vegas.
I couldn't agree more with you on that. I think that, being barefoot, especially around your house, as much as possible is good. Even when I'm doing my strength work here and like my boxes and I always try and be unless it's like something like I need to jump to a box or something like that and there's gonna be a lot of impact, I go barefoot, and I think that's a really good thing. I think we talked about this before, how they don't let you do that at the gym.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
And
I do think that there's some value in doing some barefoot running, especially if you run on grass or something. Or, we've done some research on running on treadmill, and that's not always a friendly surface to the feet, because it's a lot of wear and tear between the sole of the shoe and the treadmill bed. And I'll tell you, the research in this area is really, you've got to do a deep dive to really understand the research that is out there for barefoot running. And that's because the way that the research is often done can sometimes almost drive the outcome of the study. And so you got to be careful and really look at the methods of a study when they even compare two shoes or compare barefoot running to shoes. And just one example is that in the early research of barefoot running, the researchers were instructing the runners to still run heel toe when in bare feet.
Yeah.
And they did that because experimentally it made a lot of sense, because now you're comparing the heel toe running pattern in running shoes to heel toe running in barefoot. But what we know is that when you run barefoot, you change the way you run, and pretty dramatically you change your foot strike. And it would typically be a forefoot strike or mid-foot strike when you're running in bare feet versus running in shoes and doing a rear foot strike. And so sometimes the data, you've got to be really careful looking at a paper to understand the experiment and what the instructions were to the subject in terms of what style of running to actually use.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the whole barefoot running thing, and I honestly don't even pay attention to the space anymore, because I go and, to a big 10K race and I look how many people are barefoot, 0.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Half marathon, 0. The Ironman, 0. So to me, it's like nobody's actually doing this in reality,
Right.
or there's one kooky guy that's doing it and he's built up over time and done it. And that's great. But to me, it's not even it's not even a relevant topic anymore.
Well, and I agree with you. And I think that's the way to look at it. Now, I do also, we do have in triathlon, we got times where you're going to be in bare feet and you're going to be running it. And you do need to do some practice when you're getting out of the swim and running to your bike, or if you're getting off your bike and running to your T2, depending on the setup. And so there are times that you've got to pay attention to that.
No, I agree with you. But normally during that time, my feet are so frozen that I don't feel anything. So I have to pre-freeze my feet to practice that.
Or I'm notorious for leaving a pair of shoes at the water exit so I can just slip them on and run. Exactly. Especially now at Lake V, the way the transition is from swim up to the transition to the bike.
All right, so I think we covered that one. So how about we'll move on to running ruins your knees.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a really interesting one, because this is a really common myth.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense. Yeah.
It does, right? Well, one could say that running ruins everything.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
It ruins your feet, it ruins your hips, it ruins your back, it ruins your muscles. And I personally have had people that I've worked with, as an athletic trainer, that's told me this, like, well, I don't run anymore because I've got bad knees.
Right.
And then I look back to my clinical career and I work in some physical therapy clinics and see, rehab patients with total knee. None of them are runners. Right?
Yeah.
It was mostly relatively sedentary people, or we saw a lot of golfers, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one, right? Because we've talked a lot about like load before. And when we load something like a joint or a bone, because really it's talking about bones in osteoarthritis, but when we load properly, our bones actually get stronger, and our joints get stronger. There's a ton of research on this, where you even just take walkers, right? We take someone that's 70 that's been walking their life, and someone that's been sedentary. We look at them, and the person that's got osteoarthritis is the person that hasn't been doing anything. Right? The joints need loading. Now, that being said, if you run way too much, yes, you can actually do damage. Right? So I would not advocate that the average person go out and run 100-mile weeks week after week after week, or longer. But if they build up properly, that's totally possible. But in our world of triathlon, where the average person's probably running 20, 30 miles a week, you're not going to destroy your knees.
No, that's right.
If anything, you're in the sweet spot of making them stronger.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I like your arthritis example. In fact, why would we ever get arthritis in our hands if it's related to, something like running? It doesn't make sense. And, here, the research I've done has really been focused on that impact phenomena in running. And we do often get caught talking about that being a negative. And we try to do things to reduce the impact force. And, by wearing shoes or running a particular way or what have you. But you're spot on is that there's a positive aspect to impact, and that's bone growth. And we know that from a lot of the, microgravity work, like, looking at astronauts and what happens when you're in space for a long period of time. You see that degradation of bone because they don't have that regular impact to stimulate bone growth. And so they've come up with different ways to allow for some impact, like, using bungee cords to hold them down while running on a treadmill. And sometimes you just need a little bit of impact to stimulate that positive growth in bone. And so some impact is actually good. It is a matter of finding out where that threshold is, where it becomes too much. And really it goes back to something you and I are a big advocate for, is the recovery.
Yep.
And as long as you have sufficient recovery, your body can adapt to that impact. And I think this is where you're going with the high mileage week. You're probably not having enough recovery time to be able to build muscle or build bone and muscle to, in response to the impact that you have. And then you get injured.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also an interesting one when we look at cyclists.
Mm-hmm.
And cyclists actually have higher numbers of osteoarthritis than runners.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, the other, and obviously it's because of the load, right? They're not having that the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can do bone scans on these people or DEXA scans and actually look at their cortical thickness of bone of a cyclist versus a runner. And it's not the same.
Yeah.
And, or look at some of those weightlifting.
Mm-hmm.
People that do weightlifting have really strong bones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And these are things that we want people to do, right?
Yeah.
Because these are the things that actually help prevent things when you get older.
Yeah.
Right? Help prevent hip fractures, help prevent arm fractures from falling. One of the things I think about triathlon being so good is because we're getting stress by running. We're getting stress of the upper body by swimming. Whereas if you were doing just cycling or even just swimming, swimmers are notorious for weak bones, right?
Yeah.
I heard somebody tell me the other day, I don't remember the term they used, but basically that swimmers had bird bones because they're hollow, right? And I'm like, it kind of makes sense that we were talking about stress and stress fractures.
Yeah.
And like, the truth of the matter is, if you take someone that's been a lifelong swimmer and you do some scans of them, their bones are very thin and their cortical structure is very thin because they haven't had that load. And then, so you take someone that's been a lifelong swimmer and you transition them to running, you have to be so careful with them because you could develop stress fractures within a couple days. Or you take a cyclist, same thing, have them run, or a cyclist and have them do like upper body stuff, especially the high end cyclists that do no weight training at all of their upper body because they want to be as skinny as possible. I mean, the fracture rates are amazing in pro cycling in the upper body. And one of the reasons we think is because their bones are so weak in the upper body. So I think this is a really good myth to kind of bust, is like running is, especially if done properly with proper, like you said, proper recovery, is very much a good stimulus for bone health in the knee.
Well, and I love it. You said a couple of things that I want to jump on and follow up on. One is, I love that you bring up a stress fracture because you're more likely to get a stress fracture from the high mileage than arthritis, for example, because that is all related to the lack of appropriate recovery. And a stress fracture is a broken bone. And so, I think people need to treat it that way. When you hear that you've been diagnosed with a stress fracture, you got to treat it as if you just broke a bone, because that's what it is. It's a fracture. But the other part that I wanted to mention, and I can't remember if you were working with this student. There was a student doing some work trying to actually get empirical evidence on that anecdote that you're talking about with the bone density for non-weight bearing athletes versus weight bearing athletes. And I can't remember the student off the top of my head, but they were going to do bone density scans of soccer players versus swimmers at the collegiate level to see the similarities and differences. And what's interesting is that the research in that area is pretty thin. Yep. And with swimming, what's also interesting is you can still get some impact in swimming. Yep. And that's in the flip times. And so now it comes back to what's the minimum threshold for impact to generate some positive bone growth. And this is where it's an interesting area. So I don't know the research in that area.
Yeah, and I think the research that's been done, and you made mention of the student, they did it with collegiate athletes.
Yeah.
And we were talking about like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, they're still relatively,
their bone density is going to be higher already.
Exactly. When you talk about somebody that's maybe 60,
that's a great point.
60 or 70, and we're more concerned about osteoarthritis.
Yeah.
I think it's a different story, and there's very little research on that. Well, first of all, just finding people in their 60s and 70s that actually are exercising regularly. I mean, there are people, but I mean, it's not as many as we would like.
No, that's right. Oh, good topic.
Yeah. Oh, and the other one I wanted to add in this one is, so we talked a lot about bones, but we didn't talk about things like patellofemoral syndrome. So I think, and then just tendinopathies. So like patellar tendon in particular, or IT band. So I think when we talk about bones, I think there's really good evidence that, running is productive. If you develop a tendinopathy, because usually this is, once again, not recovering properly, or increasing your stress too quickly. I think that that can be a reason people stop running. And I've worked with people. I haven't ran because every time I run, my knee hurts. Well, where does it hurt? And they point to the patellar tendon, and often they're given poor advice. And the advice needs to be back your training off, do some strength training, increase your tendon strength, and do it in an incremental fashion, and you can overcome these things. And what ultimately happens, I think, is, and what I've seen is, people stop running because it hurts. So they're like, okay, that's it, I'm gone. I'm not going to run for 6 months. And then 6 months later, their knees are feeling good. Oh, I feel good. All right. And they go for a run. It goes okay. And then they run again. It's okay. And then the third run, it's hurting again. And we know that the science says that you actually have to load these tendons. There are specialized cells in tendon called teneocytes, and the teneocytes are the cells that basically replicate tendon and make it stronger. And if and they get stimulated by putting load on them. Tendon means tension, right? And a teneocyte is stimulated with tension. And so if you don't put tension on it, and it's going to get weak. Yeah, you didn't stress it anymore, so it's not going to hurt. But just taking time off, and we've talked about this before with other injuries, but just taking time off is not going to make you better. And I think that's I encourage people that if they have that kind of injury, to work with a professional that understands tendon loading and muscle loading, and how those things actually how they work.
No, I love it. Yeah. And because you need to still be stressing the system, but get it below that threshold so that you're able to allow the system to recover and be stronger.
Yeah, exactly. All right, awesome. That was a good one. The next one, the myth: walking is weak.
Walking is what?
Weak.
Oh.
That you shouldn't walk, basically. You should, runners run, and run walking is a poor strategy, and you can't get faster by run walking. That's I see this all of the time, even just driving around or riding my bike around or running in my neighborhood. People don't want to stop when they start running.
Yeah.
See them at the traffic light and they're like running in place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And heaven forbid they'd walk a little.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan of run walk.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it on my long runs where I'll run for like 10 minutes and then walk for a minute,
Yeah.
run for 10 minutes, walk for a minute. And after every time I walk for a minute, I feel better.
Yeah. Right.
Like my form gets better again. So I don't know, where are you on the run walk?
Oh, I think it's the way to really approach, especially iron distance events. In fact, I would think probably about 95% of the athletes agree with run walk. They may not know that they agree with it, but what's the most common anecdote that we hear with the marathon portion? I'm going to run to each aid station. I'm going to walk to aid station.
Yep.
And I'm going to run to the next aid. That's great plan. That's a run walk strategy.
But they don't train it. They'll
That's
go
right.
for their 20-mile run in their build, and maybe they'll stop and get some water along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
they might stop intermittently, but
Yep.
they don't have a plan that, hey, every mile I'm going to walk for 20 seconds
Mm-hmm.
and or 30 seconds, because that's the amount of time it's going to take you to get to the aid station.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So once again, I've talked to lots of people with the exact same strategies. Like, oh, during the race, I'm going to do this. I'm going to walk the aid stations. I'm like,
Yeah.
did you train that? No.
Yeah.
Or I've seen people do this strategy too, is I'm going to walk the uphills.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I have no
That's a good
problem
one.
with that
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah. Right.
But they don't train that strategy.
No.
Right. And so then they start loading in a different way as they walk
Mhm.
these the uphills in the race, but they didn't practice that
Yep.
in their buildup.
Well,
So the other area that I think this is really interesting and you and I've talked a lot about polarized training
mhm.
and zone 1, zone 2 training, building aerobic endurance. A lot of people, to be truly in zone 1, have to actually walk, especially any incline.
Yeah.
Right. And it gets really frustrating for them. Like, I have to walk anytime it goes uphill a little bit. If I got to keep my heart rate under 130, I have to walk.
Yeah.
Like, well, what's the problem there? What's your goal here is to become aerobically more fit.
Yeah.
Your heart doesn't know if you're running or walking. It knows it's beating 130 beats a minute.
Right. Right.
So you should take that as a bonus. It's like you get to walk and you get the same benefit as running with less impact.
Well, and just to add to that, there are speeds where it's better to walk than to run metabolically. And so we know if we look at the biomechanics of walking versus running, they're different. That's obvious. Your muscles are used differently. The timing of how muscles are used is different. The stride length, the stride rate is going to be different. But if you take some speeds, 3 miles per hour, and you have someone run at 3 miles per hour versus walk 3 miles per hour, walking will be less costly than running. Yep. And that's probably true for 3.5 miles per hour. That may actually be true for 4 miles per hour, 15-minute miles. That it may actually be less costly to walk than to run. But yet the mindset, the myth is don't walk. Well, if it's more costly to run the same speed that you're going to be walking, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. I especially think someone that's going to do an Ironman, they have to do this strategy.
Yeah.
They have to incorporate walking into their strategy, because for most people, and I'm going to say most people, like, you're not in the top 50th percentile, so 40, let's say 51% are going to walk a significant amount of the marathon.
Yeah, right.
There's I get it, like the really fast people, they're gonna run a majority, but you start looking at the people that are going 14 hours, 15 hours, 16 hours, 17 hours. You've been on the course at that time. I've been around, I've watched finishes of those races, and people are walking.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that the mentality and the mindset needs to change around training, that
Mhm.
if that's the reality that you're going to do a 5-hour marathon, it might actually be more efficient, like you said, to actually train to walk fast
Mhm.
rather than
Mhm.
run slow.
That's right. That's right. Well, and to add to that, we're a victim of, social media and looking at highlight reels of races.
Yeah.
And those highlight reels on any Ironman, where they're going to be 10, 15-minute long, they cannot, they have to take an 8-hour event and compress it down to whatever window they're trying to present in. So they can't show you the unexciting parts. I remember watching Jan Frodeno's first win in 2015 because I was getting ready for Louisville, and our Ironman Hawaii was the day before Louisville. So I sat in bed just watching the whole thing. I watched the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I saw Jan Frodeno walking the aid station, cooling off and getting his fluid, and then he would run. So here, the guy who won the race was actually doing that strategy. And what's interesting is we know there's probably more anecdotal at this point, but still it seems to keep popping up, is that you do have to train your brain to start running again. And so
Yeah.
this is, I think, your point in terms of practicing that. If you're at mile 20 and you decide to walk, it may mentally be harder to start running again unless you crossed that threshold before.
Yep. Agreed. No, and once again, I think that you and I are advocates of people being in the sport for a long time,
Yeah.
making it part of their lifestyle. That I think that they need to, or it would, they don't need to. It'd be good for them to embrace a
Yeah.
little bit of this run walk strategy.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've done a lot of walking in my training.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to hurt me. If anything,
Yeah.
I think it makes me better.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, I've started advocating for people who are training for iron distance to do a lot of hiking.
Yeah,
especially in our area in Las Vegas, there's some wonderful hikes, with that incorporate going up and downhill, some major hills.
Yep.
And that can be really, that can be a really good training mode for you.
I agree. Like if you're thinking that you're going to do like a 4 or 5 hour marathon on tired legs, go for a 4 or 5 hour hike a few times.
Yeah, that's right.
You'll be on tired. You'll be tired, and it's good. And once again, your heart doesn't know the difference. Your bones are being loaded. Your tendons are being loaded in different ways. I too am a big advocate of hiking, and I'll even tell people, okay, I want you can do like a hike.
Yeah.
So if it's flat and good footing, jog that. If it's steep and the footing's not good, walk that part. And you'll be amazed at the load that you can put on yourself. I'll also add though that we've talked about this before, that I've done it as well, as because my wife really likes to hike. Is it's an off day, a rest day, so I'll go for a hike. And next thing you know, you're out like 3 hours and your legs are wobbling, and it's like, well, that is not an off day anymore. And I think that we have to remember that it's hiking can be very strenuous on the system. So
I love that, and I think that's a great message.
Yeah. The other one I like with the hiking, and I've not done it, but I've once said this is anecdotal from other people, and then coaches I've read some stuff on, is have their athletes hike with weight.
Yeah.
So weighted backpacks or weighted vests.
Yeah.
And I think that that's such a good thing. Just to add a little bit more stress, and it doesn't have to be a lot, like just 10 pounds. Like,
right.
I know when I hike with Marie, I want to carry the backpack because it's got the water in it. I want to, because I want a little extra stress on the system, and it's not a lot. It's a couple bottles of water. But it'd be, I think if I threw a couple of 5-pound weights in there, it would be just enough to give me that little bit more stress.
Just a few more water bottles and just take all your water that way.
Exactly. Exactly.
No, I think we're both eye to eye on that one. I love that.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Should we do one more? I know we've been an hour.
Yeah, we just have 2 more.
We have 2 left.
Okay.
And I think the next one is really good, and we can do it. I think we can do it really quickly. It's the myth is your watch knows best.
Boy, I tell you what, this is where technology is, helpful, but yet it's not there. And the big catchphrase right now is artificial intelligence or machine learning trying to take in all these data points that we're collecting using these different devices, not only on our watch, but our bikes and even swimming, and then trying to use that to predict a training response. We're not there yet. And partly because we don't know. We can't, and we've talked about this before, and I love it. I mean, like if we follow the same training plan for each of us this year versus last year versus year before, we're not going to get the same training response. Everything's different. And so it's constantly a moving target to figure out how to get that training response. And you have to account for work stress, not only and not only just exercise stress. So it's complicated.
It's super interesting to me. Like, you know, the best runners in the world are the Kenyans for distance runners. And you can argue maybe some Ethiopians, they're not running with running watches until they become like almost pro, right? They're going off of feel and off of RPE. And well, how is it possible that they can become these unbelievable runners without technology? Now, don't get me wrong. Once they get to that higher level, they're using technology and they're fine tuning it with their technology and with good coaching. But you don't need a running watch, right? You don't need a GPS watch. You don't even need the time, right? You can get your loop that you kind of know, and sort of the distance, and you leave at 6 a.m. and you get back around 7 a.m. And you ran a 3 out of 10 or 5 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. You know what you did, right? The only thing I think is really good is for if you have a coach that's remote. Because then they can actually see what you did, right? And if they have if you had certain intervals you're going to try and hit, or certain things you're going to try and hit, great. But I think that even that it can be overprescribed. And I'm a fan of the just run. Just go out, whatever feels good today. How long? However long it feels good. If you take that first 20 minutes and you're like, oh man, I'm struggling today. Well, maybe it's time to turn around and come home. If you're 20 minutes out and you're feeling great, maybe that's the day you go an hour 20, rather than, well, it's Saturday, it's my long run, and my watch is telling me I have 12 miles to do, and I better do those 12 miles. And by the way, and it has to be at 9-minute per mile pace. Well, I got to do that. And I think that can be very dangerous. And basically the fact is here is listen to your body. And you said that, right?
And I think from a pro, just another anecdote, that Daniela Reed does not race with a watch. And she's, arguably probably one of the best women triathletes out there. And she doesn't race with a watch. And so I do like your point that a coach is probably better than the watch itself, because the coach is in essence the artificial intelligence. And the whole idea is trying to get some objective measure of what you're doing. And so the technology is great, but it's not there. I get done with a run or bike, and it will say you need 10 hours recovery. And I'm like, well, I gotta go for a swim.
Or you do an Ironman, and then it comes back and it says, oh, you need 48 hours recovery. No, I need more than 48 hours. Right?
It says unproductive training.
Unproductive training. What are you talking about? Unproductive training? What do you know? You don't know that I'm also biking and running and swimming and doing all these other things. No, and I think we really need to be very careful with it. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because the information, if used properly, can be really good. If used improperly, and I've fallen victim to this many times, where I'm like, okay, today is this distance run at this pace, and I push it when I don't feel right.
Right. That's the fine line.
Because in my mind, I don't want to be a failure, and I'm the only person I'm failing is me. Right? If I do 10K or 6K, probably physiologically there's no difference.
No, that's right.
Right. But I told myself I was going to do 10K, so I have to, and I'm looking at my watch where I should probably just, well, I'm not feeling too good. Let's turn around and go
Yeah.
home
Yeah.
and not think about the
Yeah.
distance and the time. And so don't get me wrong, like I run with a running watch, but I don't always look at it.
Yeah.
And I can tell you at the last Ironman, I looked at my watch once.
Yeah. Right. Right.
The only time I looked at it, because I wasn't feeling very good, and I was like, I don't want to see this because I'm going to get negative. I looked at it at the halfway point.
Okay.
Because I just wanted to see, like, what was my half marathon? Like, where actually am I at?
Yeah.
And honestly, it hurt me to look at it.
Oh yeah. Right. 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 Right.
Because then I was like, oh, okay. And I'll share. It was a 155.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, good. I'll finish at a 350.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Right.
There's no way in hell I'm finishing in a 350. I'm not going to negative split in
not that course.
Not that course.
No.
But you know, like, so then I ran a little bit too hard for probably the next mile and a half, because I'm like, okay, I got this. And and so I probably would have been better off to not have watched it at all. And the truth of the matter is, I have not looked at that data.
Oh yeah, right. Interesting.
Because I don't care.
Yeah, right.
I really, I'm not going to gain anything from that data. So what is the important part? Well, I got a bunch of thumbs up on my Strava.
Yeah, there you go.
Right. But in the race, it didn't help me at all.
Yeah, right.
And then post race, I haven't looked at the data, and I don't really intend to be honest with you. So what was the advantage of running with a watch?
No, I love that. And both you and I use all these different devices. And you know, there's different metrics that we've talked about in terms of monitoring training, heart rate variability, or resting heart rate. And these are all important and they're good instruments, but don't be a slave to it.
Yeah.
And like you, I find it odd not to go running with my watch on, although I did that today. But because my battery died. And so, but it was weird running. I don't have my watch, but I still, it didn't matter. You know, it's not.
Were you able to make it?
I made it, yeah.
Man, you made it.
But like you, I don't necessarily go back and dissect every run or every training session with the data. It's nice to have to be able to go back and look over time what may have been going on, but I don't dissect it. So I think that the message is don't be a slave. It's great technology. It's fun to incorporate. I think it's helpful in the long run, but we can't make hard decisions based upon it.
So let me ask you another question, and this is more for fun. When you do a race, do you track your swimming?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Is it like halfway between buoys? Do you look and see what your pace is?
Oh, during the swim? No, I don't.
No, So that's what I'm getting at. Like, I see all these people, and then the start line, they want to get it exact to the second. Oh, I'm starting my watch, and I'm like, well, what are you getting here? Like what is you're gonna look at that as you go? Is it gonna change? Now, if you wear like the foam goggles or whatever, you know, I've worn them in races. I haven't worn them in races. It makes me feel bad when I wear them in races, so I don't wear them in races anymore. But it's an interesting one, right? Like that people are really concerned about getting their swim tracked. And then we look at a lot of the watches, and the swim tracking is horrible.
Yeah.
Especially if it's under a wetsuit.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know with your watch, mine under a wetsuit, I get nothing basically. So, and I'm not going to wear it on top of my wetsuit because I'm going to be trying to take my wetsuit off, and it's going to get stuck on the on the watch. For a while, I was wearing. I think I told you I was wearing an old running watch in my cap. Yeah. And mostly for that, I was just wanting to see how straight I was swimming. But then I started realizing, well, what if the buoys aren't straight? So I'm going buoy to buoy. It's looking like I'm doing this. And there's a lot of times we've raced where the buoys have not been straight. Yeah, that's right. One gets blown away and all of a sudden everyone's off course. Exactly. So it's an interesting one, like, you know, that we can survive the swim, no problem, without looking at our metrics, but it can't survive the run or the bike. But it's just, to me, this is more just fun to talk about. All right. So the last myth, since we're there, is I'm not ready to race.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm a test case for that one. So, hey, you know what? The whole idea of the sport is to have fun and enjoy it. And there are going to be days that you are not at your right fitness. And if you want to go race, you go race. And just be ready that you're not always going to have a PR. I did St. George and I was totally unprepared fitness wise for that. And I paid the price.
Yep.
And I wasn't able to finish, but I still had a great experience and it was fun doing it with different people and seeing people along the way. Now, that being said, I'm here in Hawaii and I was going to do the 70.3, but I'm not going to do it. But that's because I've had some more health issues and it's a better decision to say, you know what, I'll race next year. And this year I'll go volunteer and enjoy that aspect of the race. So there are times where you need to say, health-wise, maybe this is not the right time to race. But if you're just not fit, just go race. Just go enjoy it and get some experience out of the race, even if you're not 100% fit. And I know that's hard because I'm kicking myself. I didn't finish St. George, but at the same time, I took the risk and I started and still enjoyed the experience.
No, I agree with you. And I honestly, I've done this where I haven't been fit and haven't raced, and then I regretted it. And I think you're spot on with it. As long as you're not going to do damage to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Like you have an injury and that's why you're not racing. That's the smart decision. Right. Well, and I made that mistake too, but but if you're just, you're not as fit as you thought you're going to be, you missed a couple of training sessions along the way or a week here because you did something with your family or at work or where, and you're not going to PR, that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? Just set your goals a little less. Like, hey, this is my goal for today. This is where I am, and be honest with yourself, and then go out there, hit that goal, and move on, because that's the PR for the day.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be your PR all of the time. I agree, and I think sometimes we as a society we don't allow ourselves that, right?
Yeah, every race needs to be faster than the last one, and that's just not the reality.
And the truth is if you went to, I don't know, let's say, John, you went to Florida and you knew nobody, and you signed up for a local race, and you went out and raced, and nobody knew you raced.
Right.
Did the race actually happen?
There you go. Oh,
right? Like you didn't put on Strava. No. It wasn't. Someone would have to really go and hunt you down in the results. You should treat every race like that. It shouldn't matter what other people. What other people see and what other people think. Like, oh well, John ran a 30-minute 5K. Oh, he's really out of shape. He went out and ran a 30-minute 5K. Like that's a good, that's where he was today. And he went out and towed the line and he did his thing. And I think we often, as athletes, really think that everyone else is watching what our times are and what our
and nobody cares.
And nobody cares. Nobody knows.
No.
It's but nobody else knows, and I think that's an important.
Well, and really, when I sit back and I look at St. George, and I'm like, I actually am really pleased with how far I got before everything went south, and given the fitness that I had. So looking back on some of those things, that you can really take a step back and say, there's still a lot of good that happened. So enjoy the racing for what it is. It's a time to connect with other people and to challenge yourself, whatever that challenge is for that day.
Exactly, and have fun. Racing should be fun. And there's nothing wrong with having a race be a training day.
That's right.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's like, hey, I'm gonna go do a half marathon. I had a long run on the Saturday, and you go out and run it at 150, and your PR is 130.
Yeah.
You're still out there experiencing something with a bunch of other people, and you're having some fun, and I see nothing wrong with that.
No, that's right.
Awesome, John. Hey, we got through it.
Yeah, that was a good way to end. And so we've got 70.3 tomorrow here. I know we've got a few local people doing the race, so that'll be fun.
Yep,
And if
best
they
of
are
luck to them.
watching or they're gonna watch, I'll be on the kayak, so try to find me and say hi.
Yeah, don't grab onto his kayak. No,
That's right.
unless you need
Awesome.
to.
Hey, good talking.
Yep. Okay. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, sounds good. Bye.